So the typical dilemma for DeFi lending is you want to concentrate capital to simply make capital more efficient in whatever opportunities that you might have. And at the same time, you want to segregate risk and isolate risk. That creates a challenge with fragmentation of liquidity. And obviously going to these two different directions won't necessarily work. So you have on the other side of the spectrum, full isolation, fragmentation of liquidity, and the other side, obviously you have concentration of liquidity, and you don't have isolation of risk. So the solution for us and Aave v4 that we've been solving over the past couple of years is to figure out what is the best middle ground. How do we actually ensure that we can tap into existing liquidity pools and take the benefit of the pooled model that DeFi has been very successful and built upon. And also how we then can create from that shared liquidity model a market structure that serves any sort of like a credit use cases. And we came up with a modular architecture between hubs and spokes where liquidity is stored in hubs, and then the spokes are where all the collateralization, the borrowing logic is happening, and the use cases are. And these hubs are then allocating credit lines to these spokes that are individual use cases. And this model sort of taps into two important things, liquidity concentration and avoiding the fragmentation of liquidity while being able to isolate risk further. And why we actually built this, so obviously we want to have a ability to tap into use cases that are beyond what we know today in DeFi. And something that I like about DeFi and what keeps me in the space is that I feel that every sort of year or a cycle there is new primitives, on-chain primitives, but also interesting opportunities that are coming from tokenization and credit in general. And when we started Aave, even back in the ETHLend days, our goal was to solve credit, not just simply lend against, let's say, Bitcoin and Ethereum and native crypto assets, but actually think about like how smart contracts and how DeFi could be used to back all kinds of credit opportunities. And I think there's just different audiences in general. So there's the degen audience, like me and some of you all, if not most, that love the way DeFi works today. There's certain improvements that can be made. And there's also institutions that are looking to understand how to use DeFi in their own existing products. They need, for example, isolation, risk management is important. You have also RWAs. That is a whole big category with sub-asset categories and all its own peculiar environments. And in overall, everything that we build needs to be resilient at the same time. So what we are actually planning with Aave v4 is to understand how value can be actually collateralized. And the typical way that happens is through tokenization. That is one option. The other very popular option is yield-bearing stablecoins. We also believe that there might be no tokenization as well in the future. And we want to tap into those credit use cases with Aave. And Aave v4 is basically here to serve that. So what we're looking to do is to make Aave a credit layer for all financial use cases in the future, whether it's against native crypto assets, against tokenization, or simply against data that can be brought from consumer finance, businesses, any sort of like a real-life use case. And the idea is to actually use what DeFi does really well, aggregating capital, creating better cost structure for lending or trading or any other use cases, and at the same time then finance a lot of these opportunities. So Aave v4 for us is something that will ambitiously try to achieve and back all the credit use cases in traditional finance. And what is most exciting for us today, and I'm really proud of, is that Aave v4 is live today. Thank you. Do you want questions or?
This guy first, go for it. I have a mic.
Thank you very much. My question would be going to one of the first slides. How is spoke allocation determined within one liquidity bucket, one liquidity point?
That's a really, really great question. So there's a few things to consider. Liquidity hubs are governed, they have a governance, and that governance and risk assessment determines how credit line is allocated from the hubs into these spokes. Another thing to realize that is really interesting is that every spoke can be a custom implementation. So when I earlier mentioned that the Aave v4 can facilitate a model like lending against ERC20s, it can also facilitate against ERC71s, but also lending against data that might come from a outside blockchain resource, such as, for example, credit data or obligations. And it shows sort of how flexible the architecture is to any kind of a credit use case.
Another question. We have a social decentralized wallet. Now, how is the best way for builders, founders, and us to integrate the V4 via API into our product?
Yeah, there's different ways. Obviously, the most classical way is to integrate directly the smart contracts. The another way is through the Aave Kit, which is the API endpoints that gives additional, makes it as easier to integrate with ready-made as the case. And one interesting thing for developers about Aave v4 is that from a community standpoint, we wanted to have a version of Aave where any developer or development team can come and build and expand the protocol. So what that means is that because the architecture is modular, we can add different kinds of spokes into the architecture for different kinds of use cases, whether it's lending on chain or something else. And the Aave v4 as an architecture might look very different in 6 to 12 months or 2 years from now, just based on these community and public contributions.
Hi, thanks for your presentation. What about the current Aave v3? Will you incentivize users to migrate to Aave v4?
Yeah, we've done now three migration strategies, and this is the fourth one, and we follow the very similar path as with the previous migrations, where the users have always the choice to migrate. There's not going to be forced migration or sort of push there. And obviously it will take time. So V3 is going to be here around for years to come. Technically V1 and V2 are still around, and that's the beauty of DeFi and the blockchains, because applications can run forever, and then users can actually choose what they want to use. So that can happen pretty organically.
So if we ignore US Treasury bills, is there an asset class that you think could actually make Aave and Aave v4 grow and offer yield to people on chain at scale, like something that's really scalable and could be tokenized and brought on chain and actually sustain growth for the protocol without the US debt?
Yeah, I know no one likes US debt, right? But Yeah, I think the scale comes from actually diversification of different assets. And one thing that the new architecture will help is that because of the hub and spoke model, you can have multiple hubs. So on the launch of Aave v4, we launched also Aave Pro, which is the new interface for Aave. And I think there's a few developers there actually launching it there and testing it out. So no sweat. And it's going to be also live in a few minutes. But I truly think that the initial configuration is that there is Prime, which is a lower risk market, and then there is Core, which is risk adjusted and plus for risk return. But over time, there can be more hubs for particular types of collaterals. And Aave already has a RWA-based market, Horizon, which is also going to be ported to v4 with additional flexibility because you can add and move different asset classes to separate spokes. So I think that's actually the future of the scale is to have a diversified set of hubs and spokes and collaterals that create that scale for yield and scale also for these borrowing opportunities. But I don't count any scale until we actually hit to mainstream credit use cases and actually can produce credit to millions of people. And that's the sort of a scale we're going towards with Aave v4.
Thanks, Stani. You actually addressed my question originally about Horizon moving over to Aave v4 because I know that you're already leading the way in terms of financing tokenized RWAs. How do you think about the pipeline from TradFi to on-chain, right? So bringing some of the paper that's already out there on Wall Street and Main Street to on-chain investors in DeFi.
Yeah, I think tokenization also plays a big part of that, and I do think that especially RWAs that necessarily aren't traded in an active venue are interesting form of collateral, especially if the risk assessment allows that, and that is because it creates higher utility for these assets compared to assets that are already traded very actively. But something that we're excited with Aave v4 is that we're building a spoke where actually the collateral can exist somewhere else besides in the Aave protocol and can access the liquidity of Aave v4. An example is that the collateral can exist in a qualified custodian, whether it's digital assets, crypto assets, or traditional assets as well. And this opens up opportunity to actually onboard a lot of assets far more quicker by simply issuing credit lines towards those opportunities and bypassing the whole step of tokenization itself. And I think that brings a lot of scale as well.
I have a simple one. What's the feature that gives you FOMO personally of Aave v4?
I think that one very interesting feature is this built-in sweeping mechanism within the Aave v4 pools, which means that the float liquidity that is in Aave can be reallocated into risk-down opportunities. So if the rates are lower in Aave, they can be allocated into, for example, T-bills. I know this guy here doesn't like that, hearing that, but it just showcases kind of like the versatility of Aave v4 and the capital efficiency you have. The another really interesting feature is risk premiums. And normally when you borrow from DeFi lending protocols, you borrow an asset at a certain price. And if it's a pooled model, everyone, depending on their, regardless of their collateral composition, are paying the same rate for borrowing a stablecoin. So risk premiums allows to price the borrowing cost for the users based on their collateral as well. And I actually think that it might be even more useful for RWAs where you have new types of risks that are not native for the on-chain world, such as, for example, duration, and you want to price that risk accordingly directly to the asset and reflect on the borrowing cost directly.
I'm wondering if you already have an idea about Aave v5 and how it's gonna look like.
I know. I think our engineering team is always thinking kind of like the next steps, and obviously like it's a Aave v4 itself has been like a big workflow for us over the past like a couple of years, and it wouldn't be possible without our engineers. So they've been working really hard for quite a while, and I think that the progression for Aave from now on is basically increasing new modules as innovation comes. So there will be less frequent upgrades. There might be no upgrades in the future. Instead, there might be just simply better hubs, better spokes to be deployed that has certain new features, for example. And that's the beauty of a modular system, because you don't need to necessarily make changes into the existing code base.
Yes, in terms of credit products, do you see the introduction or reintroduction of the fixed rate borrowing on Aave?
Yeah, I think fixed rate is it was basically our first love with Heatland, and it's something that we're also working on. And I think the existing architecture is really interesting because it allows to create fixed rates as a spoke and tap into existing concentrated liquidity pools, which makes it with the hubs and makes it very efficient. That is also something that we're working on and quite excited about.
When mortgages on Aave?
I mean, it's a good question. I mean, with this new architecture, it's far more easier to onboard new assets. But also, I think what V4 solves is this challenge whenever we have new markets, you have this incentivization problem that you have to bootstrap the markets and incentivize the liquidity somehow. And you have fluctuation on liquidity and rates. And something that we really love about the new architecture is that anyone can build a new spoke, have new set of collaterals, have conviction that maybe can be listed even completely in a permissionless way. And if it gets traction, it can be actually, that spoke can get liquidity from the main liquidity hubs. So Aave v4 is also an opportunity for a lot of builders. And it's been surprising that during this week, and the week is still early, I've met a lot of people that are already building spokes, native spokes and use cases, and also RWA use cases. So that is now possible to do in a more scalable way, and also isolating the risk accordingly.
All right, go one last chance. Going once, twice. All right, sounds good. Thanks, Stani. Can we get a round of applause, please?
Thank you.
So up next, Stani's not.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming along and joining us. A big warm welcome to Jean-Marc Stenger, who is the